So, Laura, the morning after temple last night. How are you feeling?
To be honest, I'm feeling still a little excited in my body. There's still a bit of sexual energy running. I also feel a little doolally though in my brain.
What's doolally like?
I don't know, just like my thoughts aren't super straight, but also we went to bed last night quite late, trying to get home in London.
We were navigating London at night in a snowstorm.
But yeah, I feel content. I feel like my intentions for temple were really clear, and I also feel I received a lot of pleasure and a lot of warmth.
That's beautiful.
Mhm.
I'm also feeling quite foggy. I feel good. I feel quite wrapped up in a nice blanket of contentness, if that's a word. But before we get too much into it, what is temple? Like, where did we go last night? What did we do?
For me, temple is a place where I bring consciousness to sexuality.
Okay.
It is quite an edgy experience for me. It's been my first temple night. I remember I was just crying and then leaving because I couldn't handle all the sexual energy in the room. So, yeah, I think temple for me is adults coming together to meet each other in vulnerability and to take the risk of being vulnerable and also maybe being triggered. And like relationship stuff or even sexual trauma can be triggered in a temple. But we're going with the intention to these events to help each other move through that and beyond. So I think that's probably what I find the most beautiful about conscious sexuality events or also tantric events is that a community of people comes together to overcome, I guess, limitations of conditioning, like shame and things like that, but also healing, right? Yeah.
So it's not a sex party.
Maybe it is a little bit.
Because when I kind of give that talk as well to people, which is beautiful, which I agree with a lot, they're like sinking in and they're like,
Uh-huh.
so is it a sex party or not? Are people having sex or not? And I think that's always a big thing that I have to like, well, it can happen.
It can happen. Yeah.
Depends on the parameters of the temple, of course, because every temple is different, isn't it? It's not like one set thing because
Yeah,
you
of
have
course.
facilitators, you have hosts, and they make a temple, and
And the participants, yeah.
participants make the temple.
Yeah.
So there's like different rules, aren't there?
Yeah, the different rules. Some temples are without penetration, for example. So if people are still believing that sex equals penetration, then that would be a temple without sex, right?
Because the first temples that we went to had a pants-on policy,
That's true.
and that were quite, it's quite guided quite a lot. It's quite a big temple, and there was a no penetration, no oral sex, pants-on policy, and I found that to be quite, it was quite comforting, especially for our first temple.
Yeah, that's the beauty about boundaries, right? Like when we have really clear boundaries, we can play better, wilder, easier. And if we're in this like uncertainty of like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? Not that uncertainty is bad. I just think it's like the portion, right? Like how much uncertainty. And like the uncertainty of meeting up in a room full of strangers to eventually touch each other and be sensual and so sexual together is already a lot, especially when it's the first time.
100%, a lot of energy. So let's go back. So here we are, we're the morning after, feeling good, feeling wrapped up. But let's go back to like the journey of temple and for our temple that happened last night. And let's look at like how it feels in the body for you and for myself about getting ready for it. There's got to be some kind of preparation. I'm not just talking about what to wear, although that's an important part, but like how do you feel going into it? Because there's a lot of kind of mystery to it, and there's a little bit of like unknown. So how does that unknown feeling sink into the body for you?
I think what I love about the preparation is it's kind of like getting ready for a date.
Yeah.
And like we've been going out for 10 years. And of course we date, right? But and of course I love to dress up. But I rarely dress up because I'm wanting to be intimate with you. You know, I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm going to put on the most beautiful sometimes. But it's like, I guess our intimacy is not really about what anyone's wearing. It's more of a connection in the moment, right? It's like an energetic thing that happens, and it doesn't really matter what underwear. However, if I go to a temple where I meet a whole lot of strangers, and some people I might know, but there is this quite giddy, fun energy of dressing up and picking like something really sexy that makes me feel confident because I think I look beautiful. And I feel that's already creates like a special atmosphere when everyone has put energy and effort into but the preparation, right? It's like it's also a big magic ingredient to ceremony and ritual, the preparation and the thought and attention and time that has went into that.
Completely. It's really part of like the energy that you're bringing into the space. And it's also the consciousness that you're bringing into the space, because you're really thinking about how you want to prepare. And that's not necessarily meaning that you have to like spend ages on it, but it means that you've had some thought before going into a space. And this thought is not necessarily how you look, but it's also about how you feel. How do you want to feel in that space?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important bit. So for me, like a big part of the preparation for temple is really, it's almost like not getting lost in the what could happen, like what might happen. Because a lot of these things, that thinking about the future, thinking about worst case scenario, best case scenarios, you can go around in circles.
It's so heady, huh?
Super heady. And I find within these situations, it's like I want to not necessarily be in that heady space of thinking about what could happen, because that leads to be honest, to quite a lot of anxiety around it.
Yeah.
That nervousness of like, oh, I'm going to a space with my partner, with my wife, and we could share intimacy with other people. How does that make me feel? And I'm always sometimes thinking about like the worst case scenario of like, be doing something and then turn around and you're kissing another man and him like being all over you. And that just like kind of fills me with a lot of like dread. And I think that's quite a feeling that does come up for me. And it's also a feeling that I know I need to like feel and process, because it's not real. It's not true, because it hasn't even happened yet, And do you go through any of stuff like that, like worry or not?
I think I have this little like safety superiority complex. So let me explain. Because you're so loyal and because you're so dedicated and
You're talking about me?
yes,
For sure.
I don't really feel like I have to worry about anything.
Okay.
So remember we went to this temple in Holland, and I was like working at the temple actually. So I wasn't really interacting with anyone. And I was like, oh, you just do whatever you want. Like there's actually really nothing that could kind of make me a bit frazzled, you know?
Your exact words were, go play.
Go play.
Okay.
And then I remember you went and played, and I was mortified. So I think what's a really big part of like setting like these boundaries for these spaces is like, you don't know how you're gonna feel. It's like, I had no idea it would trigger me so much to see this passion between you and this other beautiful woman, right? And I was like, oh my God, I feel completely different than I expected to feel. So now, as I had this experience, I'm a little bit more in this place where I'm just accepting the fact that I don't know.
Yeah.
In my mind, I think it's super beautiful when you're interacting with other women because I feel so safe with you, right? It's like that exchange between in a couple of like, well, the more safety a person gives, the more freedom the other person can give, right? And vice versa. So I feel like because there's so much safety, I feel like I can give you a lot of freedom that I think a lot of men would really want in their relationship.
Yeah.
To be able to interact with other women. But always with this little, this acknowledgement of how I feel about this could change any moment.
Yeah. And do you think that feeling comes from like the notion that I am quite reserved when it comes to interacting with other women? Like, you mentioned this time in Holland, but most of the time I'm kind of just playing it quite easy, if that
Yeah.
in those respects.
It was just so surprising, I think, in Holland because, I didn't expect you to, it was like instantaneously, like there was the first opening, the first exercise, people were blindfolded and you were just like two magnets, boom.
Yeah.
And then there was so much passion from the outside perspective, and then I think what really, apart from just like a nervous system thing of like just feeling loads of fear, it's like a lot of fear in my body in that moment. I also had like a lot of like my thought spiral really went quite wild. I was like, oh, I wonder if he kisses me that like passionately. I mean, you weren't even kissing, you were just like hovering over his skin, but that made it even hotter. You were like doing everything but nothing because it was so like sensual, and it was just like there was so much pleasure and like she loved it, you loved it. I was like, oh my God, I can't watch this.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when you came over, actually.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that situation is I didn't initiate it. I initiated it energetically, but I couldn't see.
What does that mean?
I didn't know, like,
Who was in front of you because
no,
you
I
were
didn't know who was
blindfolded?
in front of me because I was blindfolded.
But now what I describing is afterwards you went and played together and you weren't blindfolded anymore.
Yes. But
Yeah.
what I was going to say is, in this situation, I didn't proactively initiate it, because that is actually quite a big edge for me because this loyalty, I'm a Taurus, right? So it's like real part of my identity of like, be loyal. And I find a lot of like strength and safety and reliability in it, and a lot of like love and passion. It's great. So the idea of like initiating it within these temple spaces with other women and other people is a big edge for me.
Yeah.
Of like, and I suppose that's a big part of temple nights, days, whenever, is to feel that edge and to lean into that edge. So when I say edge, I'm thinking about like something that makes you feel a bit uncomfortable. You can feel it in your body, like, ooh, you feel your heart going, you feel like your blood racing, maybe going a bit red, this edge of like, wow, this is out of my comfort zone. And initiating these situations with people is slightly out of my comfort zone, and I'm working on it. So what I'm saying here is bringing up 2 points, is edge and working towards your edge. Have you got any thoughts or any examples of like when in temple you've been at an edge, or this idea of working towards your edge?
Yeah, I think an edge for me is also initiating. I've gotten way better, but I usually find like other women attractive, and then there is a part of me that feels like shame around that because the thought that they could perceive me as creepy or sleazy or manipulative, trying to get them to, join us, for example, as a couple, there's like a desire for that. I was like, I wish, this person, I love her energy. I would love to play with her. but then inviting her is just so vulnerable. It's just super vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I've done it anyway a couple of times, and it's really nice.
So that's leaning into your edge.
That's leaning into the edge, yeah. And I think what's also a big edge is genuinely interacting with other men if you're not there. You know, if you're there as well, it's very like easy because I almost feel like you're watching him.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you know, I don't have to do boundaries in real time with you in a way because, you know, I don't have to be like, it's easier basically for me because I don't want to be in a position where I turn around and you might feel really hurt or like upset, which I guess wouldn't be the end of the world, but it's like I'd rather avoid that. And that's kind of why it's edgy then, you know, because I'm like, oh, for example, yesterday when we had a round where it was asking for what you would like to receive, and you were paired with a man and I was paired with a man, and we were in different parts of the room, and I wasn't, I was just, it's always in the back of my mind a little bit. Like, I guess, just like, oh, is Patrick feeling all right with this or not? Because I don't know in the moment.
Yeah.
You know? So we have our boundaries, of course. You know, you told me before, you don't want me to just kiss someone if there is no, if it's not leading up to and we're not having had, basically without talking to you, you would not want me to kiss people, which I understand. It would be the same. It's the same for me. But the thing is with the intimacy, sometimes that's a funny thing also with the boundaries. Sometimes it's not about what is being done,
100%.
but like how it's being done. And that's why in that temple in Holland, I was so like, oh my God, I can't watch this because you weren't kissing her. You were just like touching really gently, but there was so much desire and so much sensuality. And it looked so hot and it was so like, there was like a rapture, you know, it was obvious that you both were like in this rapture, in this bubble of like just passion. And I think, in this moment, I think if you would have kissed her and I was triggered, I would have probably latched onto this and be like, how dare you? But in reality, it's nothing to blame. It's like, wow, there's so much energy that I feel intimidated by that.
Yeah.
That would have been so that kind of is an edge for me to like lean into opening energetically with other men because I'm like, strong. You're also strong.
Yeah. And that makes me go back to this kind of pre-temple thinking and getting lost in the anxiety of what could happen. And a lot of the ways that we navigate it is by talking about boundaries, talking about our desires, talking about what our intention is for it, and just setting out a really nice, clear communication of being on the same page.
Yeah.
And I find that really reassuring. And it helps to like alleviate a lot of this, pre-temple anxiety. Let's just call it that.
Yeah.
And that's just super important. And it's really nice to just practice this conversation of what do I feel comfortable with? What do I want? What are my desires? And how are we going to navigate the situation together? But then you're completely right, because a lot of that stuff is very good to do, but you don't really know until you're in the moment whether it's okay. So I have this thing of like thinking, so the example was right from last night was I wouldn't want you just to kiss anyone straight away. However, if we're halfway through the temple and some gentleman's got like super nice, caring energy, it's connected with me in terms of like eye contact and respect and just making me feel safe, then that puts the idea of you having a passionate snog with this individual much more likely to happen because I already feel comfortable with this energy.
Yeah.
Because I'm coming into this pre-temple anxiety thinking the worst, and
Yeah.
usually thinking the worst in men. Of like, and I think that's why you're probably coming from an easier perspective, because in terms of how I can relate to women, because the way I see it with men is I'm worried that they'll be predatorial and they'll be taking, and they'll be like real, just like this dark masculine this dark masculine energy that's like real, like, ugh. And that then evokes this protective nature of like, what, I'm just gonna watch this happen. And this is a real primal instinct as like your partner and your husband and stuff, just like, and your lover, to be like, yeah, it just really makes me go into like, yeah, like fight mode. Like, whoa.
But what if I like it?
Like what?
Like in your scenario, there's like a predatorial male energy
Yeah.
coming to take from me. But what if I would enjoy that?
Well, you'd have to like.
Is that part of your fantasy?
I would
Or
have to. Is that part of my fantasy?
the fantasy, not the fantasy of just like the pre-anxiety, the anxiety, overthinking, you know, the thoughts. Is that because you were describing like your pre-temple anxiety?
Like it?
Yeah, in your anxiety fantasy, I'm like not liking it.
Not really, actually.
So it's always like I'm disliking it and they're
I
predatorial.
don't know. It's actually quite interesting. It's like, yeah, I don't really give you much thought. I kind of just envision this like this energy, this take energy. I suppose like the way I see it is like you're against a wall,
Right.
and you can't do anything about it. And
Yeah.
guys just like,
Or me on all
all of
fours and he's behind me, or some like kind of classic taking position.
classic position. And yeah, I suppose it would be better for me if you were liking it, because then it would be like you're safe and you're having a good time. I suppose
Nice.
the biggest thing is more like and this is when I'm just thinking the worst out of men, is thinking that they're taking their not being nice.
But that's so fascinating because you're thinking about wanting to protect me and the man being bad. Whereas if I'm walking around interacting with them, I'm worried that you're hurt because I would have pleasure with someone else.
Yeah. But don't get me wrong, this is like a real core concern of mine. But underneath that, like close second is like, oh fuck, she's really enjoying that. She can't leave me.
Yeah, okay.
It's not like super comfortable with the idea of having loads of pleasure with other people. No, that's a close second. Yeah, that's definitely there. That's more of a reality. I'm just talking about that primal, like, in the way I kind of see it in my core is like I could live with the idea of you leaving me for someone else, because that's just life, whatever. But like the idea of someone like violating you, I think is really like, it really will be a savage imprint that would take a lot of time to like overcome.
Yeah.
And so that's why it trumps as number one, and number two is, and much more realistic, more like actually could happen and has happened in the past, never happen again, knock on wood, is that, you're just swept away by a romantic lover who's like, activating your kundalini, giving cervix orgasms left, right, and center, and all of a sudden you're like fucking doing Tantra and Bali's without me.
Yeah.
Yeah, mental babe. So the one thing that when we were talking about it, and I just wanted to make, because it's like quite like sometimes it's really unclear for me, and a lot of people have always like mentioned it, is like when I talk about initiating something.
Yeah.
And this is, a lot of people are just like, what, you mean just like initiating sex? And I'm like, well, no, it's not like that at all. Like, it's more like initiating some kind of connection or some type of like scene. And there's lots of different ways that people connect and lots of different ways that we connect and like navigate the temple landscape. So like when you say initiate, what are like different ways that what are your go-to initiations in terms of like starting something with someone?
So I think it's important to initiate something that I actually enjoy,
Of course.
because otherwise everyone thinks that they're kind of suck at whatever's happening, right? So it's kind of this interesting edge between what I really want to do and what I'm ready to ask for.
Yeah.
Because what I'm ideally in my fantasy and my, I guess desire fantasy want to do is maybe having a threesome. But what I'm ready to initiate is to ask this woman if she would like to exchange sensual touch.
Yeah.
And that is a really great step, though, because it's anyway not possible to jump into, I mean, it's possible in the universe of all possibilities to have like so much passion and, between people. But in a temple setting, right, where we talk consent and boundaries, and we're like checking in with people before we just touch them, this kind of setup of inviting someone to have a massage trio would naturally move into a threesome if all the energies align, I guess.
Yeah, like a lot of pieces have to be in place for it to happen. It's not like...
So I think in a way, maybe I'm just sugarcoating this, but in a way, me not asking directly for the wildest, but starting with like, hey, do you want to get to know us through having this massage situation happening?
Yeah, and
That's what I would initiate
that's
usually.
interesting because it reminds me of like a talk/PDF document where someone was talking about how to initiate a threesome. Remember that? I think it was from Reed.
Yeah, Reed Mihalko, yeah.
And it was like, whoa, at first you don't really know how to do it because it can be really awkward. Like, how do you start having a threesome with two other people? And he lays out this like kind of like guide to how to initiate it, and it's really clever. It's just like start, be bold, but start really easy, as if the idea of saying no to it is actually quite bizarre with a request, and your request could be like, I would love if both of you touch my neck. And then the other two people will be like, yes, that does sound good.
Yeah.
And you just slowly build up from there. And the other person will be like, I would really like if both of you gave me a foot massage. And you're just slowly, incrementally building up to a point where it could, lead on to something more, more wild, I suppose. Like a threesome. And I think that's quite interesting as well. Like the initiation in these kind of temple nights is it's the slower and the gradual is kind of a good approach if you can build up the energy together. So a lot of ways to start, it could be just like, I have a desire to connect with you.
Yeah.
And however you connect is kind of, that's the next step. And it could be eye gazing, it could be like soft touch, it could be a cuddle, it could be something slow, which is also very intimate. I'm not trying to say that these things aren't intimate, but it's not like speaking your desires. It's like, yeah, I have a desire to, go down on you. It's like, well, that's pretty straight on. It's pretty full on.
Yeah, I think that it's very bold, because if if it's a line and someone would really love for you to go down in them, what an amazing match. But I'll just like, the courage it takes to ask for something that is very intimate straight off the bat, is big. What came to my mind is when you said, oh, you both stroke my neck. Oh, can you both do this for me? Actually, the level of empowerment it also needs to be able to know what you want to be, what you want to receive from two people. Because it's like, it is true. It is a beautiful flow if like you have three people and you could, take turns and request, and it kind of can take its natural flow where it needs to go and where the energy wants to move through between those three people. But yeah, it definitely made me think of when I yeah, back in the days, I would have had no idea what to request, right? It's like
I still don't really.
it's I loved yesterday how we were in the kind of foursome situation, massage foursome, and someone really enjoyed nails on their body, and you kind of had this whole new experience of like, I actually really enjoy this as
Nails are
well.
great, yeah.
I haven't really done much nails on you. Sometimes I do, but not really. So
Oh, that's something we've learned from last night.
it just adds like, yeah, all these experiences add things to that wish list or that request list of like, oh, this is something I really enjoy.
So we've talked about leading into the temple. We're now definitely talking about at the temple. We're there. We talked about initiation. And now we've kind of moved on to this topic, which is really juicy and difficult. And that's desire. And that's feeling into what we actually want. And I mentioned there's like, well, I still don't really know what I want sometimes. And yeah, it's a difficult one to navigate into feeling into what my body wants in the situation. So, okay, I was asked yesterday what we should do after we finished our first round of massages with the two other people. And I was asked, well, what do I want? And I was trying to feel into it. And I just didn't really know. I parts of me were just like, I just want to carry on with what we were doing, and I probably should have expressed that, but instead I kind of got very like lost in the options of what is possible, and also trapped in the state of like fear of not knowing what I wanted to do, and also not knowing what other people wanted to do and what you wanted to do. And it kind of led me into this little bit of paralysis of not being able to like have an idea of what I actually wanted. And at that point, it just like massive turn off. So I didn't feel any arousal. You know, someone was like, "What do you want?" I would have been
Sexual energy flatline.
yeah, I would have been happy to like, let's meditate. I would have been like, let's work on some energy, some energetic flows. Let's get a cup of tea. Let's go eat some carrots at the snack bar. Um,
Yeah.
How do you feel about navigating like what you want, what you desire in these things?
I have to say, requesting different touch and massages from each other is like a bit of a safe zone for me.
For sure.
So when it comes to, remember when we were in the sharing circle and it was, what is your mildest desire and what is your wildest desire for the night? And we didn't sit together, so I don't know what you said. I would love to know. But for me, my mildest is having interaction, like lovely interactions with my husband, you know.
Yeah.
That's one thing I shared. Which is an absolute safe zone as a couple in a temple, you know. If nothing's going, instead of sitting in the corner, you can always fall back on your partner unless they're involved into something and they don't want you to be there, right? But for us, that's usually not the case. So for me, it's like this really big safe zone that I can always, if I feel uncomfortable or if I feel a bit off or anxious, I can just pair up with you and I'm instantly back in safety. And then the other safe zone is just finding people that I find, you know, lovely, nice, friendly, warm, or even really hot. You know, that's
a plus.
That's amazing. But I can also just find someone that I think, oh, wow, this person feels really kind.
Yeah.
And I can exchange loving, nurturing touch or even hot, you know, and exciting and activating touch. So that's actually my mildest by now because we've done this so much in different.
It's kind of our go-to.
It's our go-to.
And I think this is a real benefit of going to temples as a couple, or with like an ally. You can call it an ally if you're not there, because you know there are moments where you don't know what the fuck's going on, what you want to do, and actually you just want to like have some comfort. And going in a couple, you do have that comfort, so it's like a good safety net, and you can go to these spaces and just be with that person all the
Yeah.
time, and that's super beautiful.
Because it's interesting, right? A lot of people ask us like, oh, do you not like, oh, you're here as a couple, you know, on a Tantra festival.
Yeah.
We're almost this like unicorn, right?
Yeah.
What, you're married? You're here? Like, wow. It's like so interesting because all these exercises are supposed to create really long lasting heart connection, right? So I'm like, yeah, of course I'm at a Tantra festival in a couple. Because I'm doing the practices and I have a really strong connection to this human. You know, it's like a soulmate situation. Yeah. So my point is that we often get reflected back by others that it's like a challenge, but I often find it like a really big comfort, actually, not to be there by myself. I think it would push really different growth in me if I had to be by myself when I feel anxious, because then it's like, okay, so do you actually muster the courage to go up to someone that you think is a nice person to be like, hey, can you give me a hug and just maybe do some breathing with me or talk a little bit because I'm feeling really anxious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's going as a couple that already built on a good foundation. I think is actually quite, you can play it pretty safe, and it can be not so challenging.
Yeah.
However, if you both decide, or even worse, not even worse, but if one person decides to push the boat out and go a bit more adventurous, then it adds an extra layer of making it more complex.
Yeah.
Because you're not just navigating the scene by yourself, but you're also navigating it where your actions have a bigger ripple effect to another person in the room.
Big impact potentially.
So, yeah, I think that's when things can get real hairy real quick, is when, and I've seen it, when couples or people that are together go into these spaces and one person kind of has a different agenda to the other person.
Yeah.
And the other person's doing stuff that's like great, but the other person looks kind of mortified.
Yeah.
Like, that's gonna.
And there's no communication in that moment, and you just see them the next day, and one looks really sad, and the other one looks like, all right, I guess. And you're like, oh.
Yeah. So that's a real edgy, that's a real part that, should be, that is important to know. And I think that's how we do it pretty well, is that we're always going into these things on the same page. So what's your wildest desire then? Sit the wildest, Austin, to share that from last night. It doesn't have to be like,
the wildest ever.
Bucket list.
I don't know. I find, that's the, but like the wildest that I shared yesterday was a threesome with full nakedness. And I think for me, definitely oral sex involved. And just, I like both ideas about the threesome. I like worshiping you with someone else, but I also like the idea of worshiping a woman together. And obviously it's also really beautiful to receive like from two people. So that's my wildest that I was sharing yesterday, my wildest desire.
That's nice.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice. Well, that was actually my wildest as well. And then I was thinking about it, and I was like, that's wild. But it's also very like nice. And for me, it's also quite safe because I'm navigating it as a man with two women in a heterosexual relationship. So it's kind of like,
you're getting it easy.
And so then I really thought, and I was like, well, what would be wilder? And the wilder element would be if it was with another couple.
Right.
So another man and another woman. And and I think that would then just be in the situation of, what would it be like to be in a scene where we're relating, I can relate with her and you can relate with him, and we're together in the same situation. And that that for me was wild. And I think I'm really focusing on this definition of what wild is. Because when I'm thinking about it, even thinking about it now, I'm excited by it, but I'm also like, holy fuck. But I don't know how that will turn out. And again, that is pre sexual interaction anxiety, where I'm just like envisioning the worst.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Whereas in reality, I really need to like replace that with more what could go right. And that comes by knowing this couple and being really like, they're amazing.
There's so much connection.
Let's call them, I don't know, Jody and Brad. That's Angelina Jolie and Brad. But let's call it them. And like Brad's like a super nice guy. He's like well safe and like really respectful, really kind, soft but firm. And then she's just amazing and flowy and just like beautiful and like firm as well. And it's just like, oh wow, this is like, there's a lot of potential here for everything to go really right.
Yeah.
Instead of me being trapped in this like, there's a lot of potential for everything to go wrong. So that's why I'm thinking that's the wild element.
Yeah.
That's because there's a lot of things that could go wrong. I don't know, does that
Yeah.
with you in terms of wild?
Yeah, I think wild is outside of what's pretty and known and comfortable, right?
Yeah.
So wild can be messy.
Wild is messy.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be messy, but it's definitely going outside of norms that are being on conditions. It's like going beyond the conditioning. And I think, yeah, depends on your personal conditioning, how wild it is.
Yeah, and I think this
for me, that would be pretty wild.
Edge. I think this comes back to the edge. And we've been talking about the edge, and we're talking about working towards it, leaning towards the edge to grow. And this is where another element of temple comes in that's really important, that was talked about a lot last night, is how can we be in these spaces to grow and to heal? How can we use all of this energy that people, mainly strangers, coming into the space, about 40 people, all very conscious of why they're there, very sober, very aware about boundaries, about consent. It's a safer space, as it was described yesterday. So things aren't, nothing can be 100% safe, in what they were talking about last night. But it's a space where people can lean into boundaries and grow and heal with this energy that's there. And have you had any experiences where you're like, wow, after this experience, after this temple, I've felt like I've grown or healed?
I didn't have that really. Yes. I have this all the time.
A different person.
I have this all the time. In different kind of aspects, right? Like yesterday for me, actually want to give a shout out to Jess and the Divinely Untamed temple series that she does in London. So if you want to go to temple, Divinely Untamed. Yes. So yesterday, what I really enjoyed as a growth moment was just to feel me being authentic and feeling like an ease in connection. We met this wonderful woman that I felt like a friend instantaneously, and I was like, I could have only be so easy and beautiful and funny to hang out with this person because I was not in my head. I was not insecure. I was not questioning, if what I just said was funny or not, all the things that we can, or I can get into in my little head in social interaction. So that was really beautiful imprint, it's like almost like pausing to feel, oh wow, this is how it feels. Remembering this is how it feels when I am at ease, when I'm connecting effortlessly, when I'm trusting so that I can just be myself. And other times, the growth edge is big, but also more painful.
Mm.
So I had temples that really triggered like a deep unsafety and a feeling of, yeah, sometimes it's not even something that happens to me. It's more like I see something happening and it triggers a memory in me. And I'm like, I feel so helpless. I feel like a boundary has been crossed, or an exercise is set up in a way that it allows for kind of taking, people taking without consent. And yeah, consent is a really big trigger for me when I feel like it's not really done right in my measures. So then the growth edge is therapy afterwards, literally. I book a session with my somatic therapist and I go through it.
Yeah.
Because I feel when I think about it, I get angry or I get sad or I get like numb or and so temple can also just be like an arrowhead pointing at some unresolved shit.
Yeah.
And I am really a big believer in having somatic therapy.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, so that would be like a really massive growth edge. That was a really important process that I went through there from that temple.
Yeah.
Yeah. And funnily, the same night, I also had this massive trigger that kind of stuck with me for a whole day afterwards. But I also had a massage tree with two men, and I felt super safe with them. And the way I described how I wanted to be touched, like it was like a button pressed, right? Like everything they did, it was just ecstatic for me. And I had like no problem showing my pleasure. And they did exactly what I asked them. And I loved it. Exactly.
Nice.
And it was like, wow, I don't have any shame being in so much pleasure. I'm really proud of how much pleasure I can actually feel, because I used to be completely numb. Like, I used to feel no pleasure. So it was like this big celebration of like, wow, what the fuck? How far have I come from feeling nothing to being ecstatic by like caresses on my skin, right?
Yeah.
That was epic. So yeah,
Beautiful.
and that's the same night, right? Like the polar opposites of celebrating my sexuality and being triggered really deeply. So it's like, it's a lot of emotions, a lot of energy to contain. Tempo.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really powerful that it has these opportunities. I always think about like this whole edge idea. And because it's called an edge, I always think about a cliff. And I always kind of envision like the comfort zone being like this house, small bungalow that you live in by yourself that protects you from the elements, mainly wind in my visualization. And I'm just living in my comfort zone in my bungalow near a cliff that's quite windy. And when I'm leaning into the edge, I'm going out of my house and I'm looking over the cliff and it's windy. And this wind really like reveals, because you're no longer protected by your shelter, by your comfort, this wind like reveals really what's at your core, and really reveals what's at my core of this like wounds and things that are really there present within me. And so when I step out, I'm weathering my own shadow as it is, my own like pain, and then I'm leaning over and I'm seeing what's there, and then I'm going to go back into my comfort, into my little house. And this process of going back and forth really helps me to see what's there that needs to be worked on, and also there to heal, because when I'm out leaning over the edge, seeing all things that trigger me, I'm also helping me to think about seeing it differently. So an example for this is, I have a real like trigger type. Yeah, I get really triggered by basically like sleazy. Well, I think they're sleazy. I'm projecting here. But anyway, sleazy, spiritually hippie kind of men who just like and the way I see it, you know, like slither up and like seduce and then take. And that for me gets my blood going and gets me really, like, really fucking amped up. And while being in these spaces, while being close to the edge, I feel that and I'm looking at that, but I'm also weathering the storm with lots of love and compassion, because in the space it's full of love and compassion. Well, that's what I feel. So I'm actually seeing these guys that I was projecting this sleazy kind of like taker onto, but then actually seeing, well, actually they're being really vulnerable and they're being really not what I thought they were. And this is helping me to change this belief system that's kind of really part of like how I see certain things.
Yeah.
And I find that's really powerful, and it's helping me to like change that.
Yeah.
And it's good to see that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of like good process to go through. So we've been talking about, well, you mentioned having therapy afterwards when things get turned up in terms of charge, energy, triggers. So we're going now into after temple. And how are you feeling right now after temple?
I feel
After-
very content.
Nice.
Yeah, I felt last night was very nurturing, and yeah, I felt a lot of love as well, and especially having a connection that feels like a super long friendship with someone that I
Yeah.
met on the day. I think that really kind of it's like the sense of belonging.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I belong, and
Yeah.
and that gives me a lot of peace when I feel belonging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100% agree, and I'm feeling that as well. And I think with temple nights, when they're just so beautiful, it's just it's a jam-packed evening of connection. And it's not like an hour. The one we went to last night, Jess's temple, was like 5 hours, probably 4 hours of like interaction, stuff like that. So it's you know, it's not a short event. And so there's a lot of connection, and I didn't really connect with that many people, but I was there in the room while those people connected with other people. So it's like really magnified by like the feeling in the atmosphere. But then, yeah, the connection that we had with that person, with these other people, yeah, it really does make you feel like you've been wrapped up in this nice warm blanket, because I feel it's really important, because, you know, a lot of people, including ourselves, really long for more connection, you know, being quite isolated sometimes in this particular way of living. So yeah, I think there's a lot of healing, there's a lot of opportunities for more connection, and just bringing people together, and also changing how we view sexuality and moving it away from shame, like moving it more into the light in terms of what people want and what people's desires are.
That's actually something that can happen quite a lot after an evening like that, because like eros, like life force, it's like a drug. You know, you're not tired, you're not hungry, you're in this rapture of like, wow, energy. And it can fluctuate, right? You said you had a moment where it flatlined and you were like, oh, I might as well read a book right now.
Yeah.
But there is generally it like takes you with, and the next morning can also be super shameful for many people, right? Like the next morning can be like, wow, yesterday I did this, and oh my god, like who is this person who's done all of, you know, who's just went so wild last night.
Yes.
So that's a kind of a good description also for like our identity and our kind of framework of shame, and our what we're used to expressing, like our embodied architecture as well, like how we behave. And I'm a firm believer that it's really useful to do things kind of in doses. So rather than having this like mega opening and then having this mega closure and you never go again, I think it's really, it can be a really big sign of self-love to take smaller steps.
Yeah, because you hear sometimes people going to like events and they're like, yeah, I was blown wide open. And you're like, that sounds amazing. How are you right now? And they're like, I'm still trying to put it back together.
Yeah, I'm
And
depressed.
they're like, wow, when did it happen? And they're like, half a year ago.
Yeah.
And whoa, that's a long integration period. Like we shouldn't like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's like
I understand that. And I think that could be a really like impactful thing and a change in their direction of their life. But
Yeah.
it's also like, that's quite a big cost.
Yeah.
in
It's like
terms of
our body needs to build the capacity to be with unknown, new, completely new things, especially also when we step into new identities, right?
yeah
New versions of ourselves. And I love to compare sexuality and like sexual energy with plant medicine, because both have the capacity to completely blow our fuse, blow our socks off. But the question is, how much can you take home, you know? How much from your amazing mind-altering experience can you actually take into your everyday life and the everyday persona of yourself?
yeah
So yeah, I think going regularly and
bit by bit
bit by
microdosing
bit, microdosing,
microdosing temple. That's what we do,
microdosing your sex parties.
yeah 100%.
I think there's no rush.
Because this really goes into a question of nervous system, but that's definitely a conversation for another day, of how much we can really handle. There is this electric energy that is pulsating, and if our wire in which this electricity is flowing through is super thin because we haven't worked on it, then we don't want to blow the fuse,
Yeah.
because that's when things get a bit difficult to put back together.
Yeah, which doesn't mean that if something feels really shit or doesn't really work out, that's already been too much. Because
No.
if you're able to feel it, you're obviously ready to have this experience, right? Like my first temple where I was just crying and then going to bed. It was more than my nervous system was used to, and it was really intense and it was not fun. But it wasn't like causing any damage. It was like, you pushed yourself really far and you're processing it. And then another time, I lost my train of thought.
Well, I can jump in.
Okay.
Yeah. So like, I like thinking about it, and it's a bit of a, the gym analogy. So you're working your muscle, and your muscle, if you work really hard, is going to hurt afterwards, but you can still walk. It might be difficult to go up the stairs, but it's still functioning. It's just sore because you really worked it, and you probably worked it more than you had previously. Going too far is when you snap your muscle. You can no longer walk. And that's when, in a nervous system way, that's when you become completely overwhelmed and very dysregulated, and maybe go into a real hyper arousal or disassociation and stuff like that. And that's when, it's a longer healing period.
Yeah, and then there's mild versions of dissociation, because that's what I actually wanted to share. Another temple, I didn't feel like I wanted to cry. I actually felt like happy to be there. I didn't feel like I wasn't belonging or it was dangerous to be there for me. But I left my body quite a bit. Remember this other, like this really ecstatic kind of burlesque temple that we went to. And I had to leave the space probably like 5 or 6 times to be outside. It was summer, it was nice air outside, just to sit there on a bench, because I would realize that I would lose any kind of sensation in my body. I was just like, I was snogging different girls. Remember, I was just going around like finding other women to connect.
But that one, yeah, definitely.
And then we're just like having super hot like touches and slugs, or like just like play. And it was almost like, when you see like cats and they're like a litter of cats, and like two connect and then build this little like tumbling ball of like play fight, and then they separate, and then two others, like that's how I felt. I had these like little short bursts of like rapture.
Yeah.
And I realized though I didn't even really feel my body. I didn't have actually, I had psychological pleasure of excitement and the arousal of like, oh my God, this is like pretty hot. But I didn't feel like a lot. Yeah, I was numb. So I was like, oh, okay.
Sounds like a drug.
Yeah, it was a drug, but it was also from a nervous system perspective, a level of disconnection to my body. Yeah. So
because the charge was so hot.
charge was so high that I couldn't really be fully in my body.
Yeah.
And that's also something that has really changed.
Yeah.
Like as you're saying, the wires of the nervous system tree, the tree circuit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just stronger. So I can have this level of excitement and arousal and feel the pleasure.
So we've talked about after temple. Have you got any desires or intentions of things to explore in future temples to end this conversation off with?
Well, I guess we didn't have a threesome last night, did we?
No.
No. We also didn't hook up with the different couples, so I guess your wildest.
But the wildest ones are very like, I don't really want to achieve my wildest desires.
It's not a bucket
front and
list.
center,
It's not a bucket list.
It's like something that's there to like, ooh, that's there. And if it does happen, then it's like fantastic. But I'm not engineering situations for it to happen. And if I go away with it not happening, I'm not pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's super important.
Oh, yeah.
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 For me, I don't know.
It's like, it's not a bucket list and it's not a goal. It's just a dream of a possibility. And I think having that picture of it, that vision, that dream, it also is a little step to, again, like creating more ability to contain it if it actually happens.
For sure.
It's like visualizing what could be, and then when it is.
Yeah, when it is actually being able to enjoy it without being going crazy.
Because I remember the first time I was intimate with a woman, like my whole thoughts were like, this is a woman. Oh my God, this is a woman. Like this is actually a woman. So I wasn't, I was like so distracted by the fact that I was doing something that I haven't really like given much like thought that it's could be part of my identity, could be part of me, could be part of my experience in this life. It's so funny.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's beautiful. So I think we're at a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've enjoyed this conversation. It's been beautiful. The temple last night was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
What should we do with our day now?
I think I want to go for walkies.
Yeah, it's pretty miserable outside.
And I also want another coffee and feel really high.
Okay. All of that can be achieved.
Maybe I'm going to read my book.
Read your book. Yeah, I'm going to go on a walk with you. So, thank you very much. Don't know why I'm thanking you. It's like an interview or something. Yeah. See you around. Yeah.